My name is Catherine Miller. I am 63 years old, and it has been exactly 48 hours since my son, my only son, David died in a car accident. But that isn't the worst part. The worst part is that yesterday, while his body hadn't even been buried yet, my daughter-in-law showed up at my front door with a strange man and a lawyer. They gave me exactly 1 hour to return the $12 million that David had wired to me days before he died. Mrs. Miller, the lawyer told me with a smile as cold as marble, those $12 million legally belong to the marital estate. If you do not cooperate, we will have to file a petition to have you declared mentally incompetent. My daughter-in-law Melissa didn't even look me in the eyes. She was too busy clutching the arm of this man I had never seen in my life. They thought I was an easy mark, an old woman broken by grief, too weak to defend herself. They were wrong. Because my son, my beloved David, knew exactly what was going to happen, and he left me much more than money. He left me the truth. This is my story, and I promise you, it doesn't end the way they expected. It was a Sunday in March in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of day where the sun streams into the porch and makes the jasmine vines glow as if they were made of gold. I was in the kitchen of my historic home in the French Quarter, preparing Sunday roast and jambalaya, just as I have every Sunday for 30 years. My house isn't a mansion. It's a traditional Charleston single house with a side piazza filled with ferns and antique tiles that I inherited from my parents. The walls are whitewashed every year, and in the living room, the portrait of my late husband, Frank, who died of a heart attack 15 years ago, still hangs. But to me, this house is everything. Every corner holds a memory of David. There's the mark on the wall where he learned to ride a bike and crashed into the plaster. There's the cracked floorboard we never fixed because David broke it playing indoor football when he was 8. Betty, my housekeeper and lifelong friend, was with me, snapping green beans for the side dish. "Mrs. Miller," she said with that soft, low-country drawl she has, "have you noticed that young David calls you every Sunday before coming over now? Before, he would just show up." She was right. In the last few weeks, David had changed. He called more. He asked how I was with an intensity that wasn't normal for him. The previous week, he had called me 3 times in a single day. "He's just busy with the company," I told her, though my heart already knew something was wrong. The phone rang. It was David. "Mom, is it okay if I bring Melissa and Matthew today? I need to see you." His voice sounded strange, tense, as if he were holding something massive inside his chest. "Of course, son. You are always welcome. Is something wrong?" A pause that lasted too long. "No, Mom. Everything is fine. I love you. See you in an hour." He hung up before I could respond. Betty looked at me with those eyes that know everything. She has been with me since David was born. She knows my son almost as well as I do. "Something is happening to him," she said simply. "I know," I whispered. "I know." They arrived at 2 o'clock. I saw them from the living room window. David stepped out of his black Mercedes first, the same car he bought when the company started doing well 5 years ago. Miller Logistics, the company he founded with my money when he was barely 28. My apartment in downtown, my savings. I gave him everything I had without thinking twice, because that's what mothers do, right? We give everything for our children. David was wearing jeans and a white button-down shirt. He looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes that I hadn't seen before. And when he ran his hand through his hair, that nervous gesture he's had since he was a child, I saw his fingers trembling. Melissa came out next. Melissa Sterling, my daughter-in-law of 10 years. Impeccable as always in her beige designer pantsuit and Louboutin heels that cost more than I used to earn in a month as a schoolteacher. She didn't even deign to look at the house. She was glued to her iPhone, typing frantically. And then Matthew, my 9-year-old grandson with those huge brown eyes identical to David's. He came running toward the door. "Grandma, Grandma!" he shouted, and my heart melted as always. I opened the door, and he threw himself into my arms. He smelled of kids' shampoo and happiness. "Did you make bread pudding, Grandma? Please say yes." I laughed, though I had a knot in my stomach. "Of course, sweetheart, with extra caramel sauce, just how you like it." David came up behind Matthew and hugged me, but it wasn't a normal hug. He squeezed me tight, as if he were clinging to a life raft in the middle of a storm. I felt his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. "Hi, Mom," he whispered in my ear. "Thanks for having us." David, this will always be your home, I told him, pulling back to look him in the eye. Are you sure everything is okay? He looked at me for a second, just a second, and I saw something in his eyes that froze my blood. Fear. My son was afraid. But then he smiled, that smile I had known since he was a baby, and nodded. Everything's good, Mom. Just tired from work. Melissa walked in without saying hello. Not a kiss, not a hi, Catherine, nothing. She simply sat on the sofa in the living room and continued with her phone. I heard her mutter something about the terrible reception in my ancient house. Betty appeared in the kitchen doorway and shot me a look that said, asterisk, that woman times, but I swallowed my pride, as I had done for 10 years of David's marriage, because my son loved her. Or so I believed. The table was set as always. My grandmother's white linen tablecloth, the good china, and in the center, the steaming pot of jambalaya golden rice, pink shrimp, sausage, and chicken that fell apart at the touch. Smells incredible, Mom, David said, sitting in his usual spot to my right. Matthew sat to my left, fork already in hand. I'm starving, Grandma. At Mom's house, we only eat salads. Melissa looked up from her phone for the first time. Matthew, don't say that. We eat healthy, unlike this. She made a vague gesture toward the jambalaya as if it were poison. I felt the blood rush to my face, but David intervened quickly. Melissa, please. My mother's cooking is the best in Charleston. Matthew is just a kid. A kid who's going to have cholesterol problems if he keeps eating like this, she muttered, returning to her phone. Betty served the food in silence, but I saw her tighten her lips. She has never stood Melissa. We started eating. Matthew talked nonstop about his soccer team, about how he had scored 2 goals in the last game, about his math teacher who was super cool. I nodded and smiled, but I couldn't stop watching David. He barely ate. He moved the rice from one side of the plate to the other, lost in his thoughts. Melissa stood up abruptly. Excuse me, I have to make an urgent call. The signal inside is terrible. She went out to the side porch, her heels clicking against the old tiles. Matthew had gotten up too, drawn to his iPad which he had left on the living room sofa. I heard cartoons start playing. Suddenly, we were alone, David and I, at the table where I had fed him as a child, where he had blown out the candles on all his birthdays, where he had told me he wanted to marry Melissa. David put down his fork. His hands were visibly shaking. Now, Mom, he said in a low, urgent voice, glancing toward the porch to make sure Melissa couldn't hear. I need to tell you something. My heart started beating faster. What is it, son? He leaned toward me, bringing his face close to mine. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the premature gray at his temples. My baby had become a 8-year-old man, but in that moment, he looked as scared as when he was 5 and had a nightmare. If anything happens to me, Mom, if anything happens to me, it's already in your account. $12 million. I wired it on Friday. The world stopped. 12 million transferred to my account. What was David saying? What, David? Explain. Listen to me, please, he interrupted, grabbing my hand tightly. His eyes were bright red. I can't explain everything now, but if something happens to me, that money is yours. It is for you and for Matthew. Do not let anyone take it from you. Do you understand me? No one. David, you're scaring me. What's going to happen to you? Are you sick? Are you in trouble? He opened his mouth to answer, but then we heard Melissa's heels returning from the porch. David let go of my hand immediately. His face changed, as if he were putting on a mask. He smiled, picked up a piece of chicken, and put it on my plate. Eat more, Mom, he said loudly, almost cheerfully. You make the best jambalaya in the South. Melissa entered, phone still in hand. We have to leave. Now. I have a meeting tomorrow morning in D.C. David? Asked, and I noticed the tension in his voice. You didn't tell me you had to go to Washington. It's last minute. Jason needs me to review some documents. Jason, Melissa's brother. I had met him once at the wedding, a businessman with a shark smile. David didn't say anything else. He got up from the table and hugged Matthew, who had come running back. I love you, champ. Behave yourself at school this week. I love you, Dad. Then he turned to me. He hugged me again, that desperate hug that was breaking my heart. He leaned close to my ear and whispered so low I almost didn't hear him. There is a USB drive in the drawer of your nightstand. I left it there last week when I came alone. If something happens, open it. And Mom, take care of yourself. I love you more than anything in this world." He pulled away before I could react. I saw tears in his eyes, but he blinked rapidly. "Thanks for the meal, Mom. Perfect as always." And they left. I stood in the doorway watching them drive away. The black Mercedes disappeared down Queen Street, turning toward the highway. I didn't know it would be the last time I would see my son alive. Betty appeared at my side. "Mrs. Miller, that boy is in trouble." "I know," I whispered, my legs trembling. "Betty, I think my son is afraid of something, or someone." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my bedroom staring at the nightstand drawer. I wanted to open that USB drive. I needed to know what was happening. But something stopped me. Fear, perhaps. Or the hope that David would come back the next day and tell me it had all been a false alarm. I wish I had opened it that night. The phone rang at 6 a.m. No one calls at 6 a.m. with good news. I was in the kitchen making coffee, though I hadn't slept at all. Betty hadn't arrived yet. The house was silent, just the gurgle of the percolator and the birds singing in the yard. The phone, that ring that would change my life forever. I picked it up with shaking hands. "Hello? Mrs. Catherine Miller?" A male voice. Official. Cold. "Yes, this is she. Who is calling?" "I am Detective James Ramirez from the Virginia State Police. Mrs. Miller, I deeply regret to inform you that your son, David Miller, passed away in a traffic accident early this morning." The words made no sense. I heard them, but it was as if they were in a foreign language. Asterisk, passed away. Accident. This morning. Asterisk. "No," I said simply. "You are mistaken. My son was at home with his wife. Ma'am, I am very sorry. The accident occurred on I-95 near Richmond around midnight. His vehicle went off the road and fell down an embankment. The vehicle caught fire. Identification was made through license plates and partially intact documents. The coffee mug slipped from my hand. It shattered against the antique tile floor, black coffee spreading like blood. It can't be. It can't be. I saw him yesterday. We ate together. He was fine." My voice sounded high, hysterical. It was someone else's voice. Where is my son?" "He is currently at the office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Richmond. We will need you to come for formal identification when you are ready." "Is his wife, Melissa, with you?" A pause. "Mrs. Sterling Miller was informed an hour ago. She is on her way from D.C. D.C. Of course, her urgent meeting with Jason." I hung up the phone. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor amidst the broken pieces of the mug and the puddle of coffee. David, my only son, the baby I had carried in my womb, the boy I had raised alone after Frank died, the man who had built a company from nothing, dead. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It was as if my body was in shock, as if my brain refused to process the information. I could only repeat one thing in my mind. Asterisk. If anything happens to me, Mom. Asterisk. He knew. Somehow, David knew he was going to die. Betty insisted on coming with me. She called her husband to drive us because I couldn't even hold my keys. The medical examiner's office in Richmond is a modern, cold, sterile building, nothing like the warmth of the South I knew. They made us wait in a small room with plastic chairs and a coffee machine that didn't work. The walls were a sickly pale green. There was a poster about victims' rights that I couldn't read because the letters were swimming before my eyes. A man in a white coat entered. He was young, too young to have to give this kind of news. "Mrs. Miller. I am Dr. Stephen Grant, the medical examiner. I am so sorry for your loss. Asterisk, I am so sorry for your loss. Asterisk, as if those words could glue the pieces of my broken heart back together. I want to see my son," I said. "Ma'am, I must warn you that the body suffered extensive burns from the fire. Visual identification will be difficult. He is my son. I want to see him." He led me down a long hallway, our footsteps echoing against the linoleum floor. Betty squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I was grateful for the pain. It was something real in the middle of this nightmare. The room was small and cold. There was a gurney covered with a white sheet. Dr. Grant approached the gurney. "Are you sure, ma'am?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure of anything. He lifted the sheet. Oh God, it wasn't my son. It couldn't be. This charred body, with black, cracked skin, features destroyed by fire. This wasn't my David. My son was young, handsome, full of life. But then I saw his right hand, the only part the fire had partially respected, and there was the crescent-shaped scar near the thumb. The scar he got when he was 12 whittling a stick on the porch, even though I had told him 1,000 times to be careful. It was him. My David. The sound that came out of my throat wasn't human. It was the howl of a wounded animal. Betty caught me as my legs gave way. "My boy," I moaned. "My boy. My baby." I don't remember how I got out of that room. I only remember the smell, that smell of burnt flesh mixed with chemicals that had lodged in my nose and that I knew I would never be able to forget. When I became conscious again, I was sitting in the waiting room with Betty beside me and a cup of water in my hands I didn't remember taking. Dr. Grant was sitting across from me. "Mrs. Miller, I know this isn't the best time, but I need to ask you some questions for the report." "Do what you have to do," I said in a dull voice. "Do you know if your son had health problems? Was he taking any medication?" "No. David was healthy. He never even took an aspirin," the doctor made a note. "And personal problems? Work stress? Family conflicts?" I thought of Sunday, his shaking hands, his fear. "I don't know," I lied. "He seemed tired lately, but nothing more." The doctor looked at me for a long moment, as if he knew I wasn't telling the whole truth. "Mrs. Miller," he said finally, lowering his voice and looking toward the door to make sure no one was listening. "There is something about this case that strikes me as strange." My heart sped up. "Strange how?" "The preliminary toxicology report indicates that your son had elevated levels of sedatives in his blood, lorazepam, to be specific." "That's impossible. My son never took sedatives." "Exactly. And no one takes heavy sedatives before driving, especially not in those quantities." "What are you saying, doctor?" He leaned forward. "I am saying there are inconsistencies. The injury patterns are not entirely compatible with a typical vehicular accident. There are contusions on the neck that could be prior to the impact. And the GPS analysis of the vehicle shows he wasn't going toward Charleston, as his wife stated. He was heading north, toward D.C. I felt the world tilt. "Are you telling me my son was—" "I am not saying anything officially, ma'am, because, unfortunately, this case has already been classified as an accident by order from above, political pressure, if I may say so. The Sterling family has influence." "The Sterlings, Melissa's family. But you don't believe it was an accident?" His eyes told me everything I needed to know. "I believe your son was afraid of something, Mrs. Miller, and I believe you should be very careful." He gave me his personal card with his cell number written on the back. "If you need anything, if you discover anything, call me." I went back home like a ghost. Betty made tea I didn't drink, toast I didn't eat. I sat in the armchair in the living room, the same armchair where David used to sit as a child to watch cartoons. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Distant relatives who had seen the news, neighbors offering casseroles and help, Father Anthony from the parish asking about funeral arrangements. I couldn't talk to anyone. I could only think of one thing: the USB drive. I got up, climbed the stairs as if I were climbing Calvary, and went into my bedroom. I opened the nightstand drawer with trembling hands, and there it was. A small black USB drive with a label in David's handwriting. Asterisk, for Mom. Only if something happens. Asterisk. I held it in my hand. It was so small, so insignificant, but somehow I knew it held answers. I went down with it, plugged it into my old laptop in the study. 2 files. One was called Times Important Video, MP4 asterisk. The other was called Times Evidence asterisk. I double-clicked on the video, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. The screen flickered, and there was David, my son, alive, looking at me from the screen. He was in his office. I recognized the mahogany desk behind him. He had dark circles. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Hi, Mom," his voice said from the speakers, and my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. "If you are watching this, it means I am no longer here. I am so sorry. I'm sorry to leave you. I'm sorry for everything." He paused, running his hand through his hair. "Mom, Melissa and her family, they aren't who you think they are. I've discovered things, terrible things. They have been stealing from me for years. But that isn't the worst part. The worst part is that Melissa has a lover. His name is Drew Silver, and they are planning. The video cut off abruptly. Only 15 seconds. But those 15 seconds changed everything. I tried to play it again, but the file was corrupt after that point. I opened the Times Evidence Times folder. There were dozens of documents, bank transfers, emails, photos, and then I saw it. A photo of Melissa with a man who wasn't David, kissing on what looked like a luxury hotel terrace. The date of the photo, 6 months ago. There were more photos, more emails, bank statements I didn't understand but which showed enormous amounts of money. I couldn't keep looking. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark study, with only the light of the street lamp entering through the window. My son had died knowing his wife was betraying him. And I was going to find out who killed him. Even if it was the last thing I did. I hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David on the gurney at the morgue, in the video, in the black Mercedes driving away from my house. Betty practically had to force me to eat something. "Mrs. Miller, you have to stay strong. Young David needs you strong." "David is dead, Betty," I said in a dull voice. "He doesn't need me anymore." "He is dead, yes. But he needs justice, and you are the only one who can give it to him." She was right. Of course she was right. I had spent the previous night reviewing the documents on the USB drive over and over again. There were suspicious bank transfers, emails between Melissa and her brother Jason discussing the project, cryptic references to neutralizing the problem and securing the assets. But it wasn't enough. I still didn't understand the full picture. It was 9 a.m. when the doorbell rang. Betty went to answer. I heard her murmur something, and then her voice got louder, more agitated. "Mrs. Miller, I think you should come here." I got up from the armchair where I had spent another sleepless night and went to the door. And there was Melissa. But she wasn't alone. Melissa was dressed entirely in black, a Chanel suit that probably cost $3,000, dark sunglasses, though the day was cloudy, perfectly coiffed, perfectly made up. There was no trace of tears, nor of pain, nor of the shattered woman she should be after losing her husband. Behind her were 2 men. One was older, about 50, gray hair perfectly cut, gold-rimmed glasses, charcoal gray 3-piece suit. He carried a shiny leather briefcase that likely cost more than my car. A lawyer, without a doubt. The other man made me stop dead. Tall, dark, attractive in a dangerous way, about 40 years old, in a fitted black suit that showed a physique worked on in the gym. Dark eyes and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This had to be Drew Silver, the lover. "Melissa," I said, finding my voice. "What are you doing here?" She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry, cold. "We need to talk, Catherine. Can we come in?" Notice she didn't call me Mom or Catherine. Just Catherine, as if I were a stranger. "The funeral is tomorrow," I said, blocking the entrance. "Can't this wait?" "I'm afraid not," the lawyer intervened with a creamy, professional voice. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Oliver Stanton, attorney for the Sterling family, representing Mrs. Melissa Sterling Miller in estate matters. Estate matters. My son wasn't even buried, and they were already talking about the estate." Betty appeared at my side, crossing her arms over her chest like a guardian. "Mrs. Miller is in mourning," she said firmly. "This can wait." "Unfortunately, it cannot," Melissa said, and her voice was like ice. "Catherine, we know David wired $12 million to your bank account last Friday, 3 days before his death. I felt as if they had thrown ice water on me. How did they know? How could they know that?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, though my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Melissa smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Please, don't insult my intelligence. I have access to the company accounts. I saw the transfer, $12 million from David's personal account to your name." The other man, Drew, spoke for the first time. His voice was soft, almost kind, which made it more threatening. "Mrs. Miller, we understand this is a difficult time, but those $12 million rightfully belong to the marital estate and to Times Miller Logistics *, where I am an investing partner." "Investing partner?" I asked. "David never spoke to me about any partner." "David and I had a private agreement," Drew said with that shark smile. I invested $5 million in the company 6 months ago. We have a joint project valued at $15 million. Those $12 million are essential for the project. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. But it sounded so convincing. Lawyer Stanton opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick sheaf of documents. "Mrs. Miller, this is a formal demand for the return of assets," he said, placing the papers on a side table by the door. The $12 million were transferred without the consent of David's legal spouse, which constitutes an irregularity. Furthermore, given the circumstances and considering your age and current emotional state, we have grounds to request an evaluation of your legal capacity to manage such significant sums. What? The word came out as a choked whisper. "In simple terms," Melissa said, and for the first time I saw some emotion in her face, cruel satisfaction. "We are saying that at 63, a widow in emotional shock from the loss of her son, you are possibly not in a suitable mental state to make financial decisions. We could argue before a judge that David emotionally manipulated you to accept that money or that you manipulated him." The world turned red. Rage rose up my throat like bile. "How dare you?" My voice came out as a roar. "How dare you come to my house before my son's funeral and accuse me of manipulating him?" Betty put a hand on my arm, but I was beyond calm. "My son gave me that money because he trusted me. Because he knew." I stopped just in time. I almost said times, because he knew what you are. Asterisk. Melissa stepped closer. Now we were face to face. I could smell her expensive perfume. Chanel No. 5. "David was under a lot of stress," she said with a soft voice, almost sweet, but with poison underneath. "The company had problems. He was making bad decisions. And you, his dear mommy, always so needy for his attention, so dependent on him, you took advantage of his moment of weakness." "Get out," I said. My voice trembled with anger. "Get out of my house, now." "You have 48 hours, Oliver Stanton said calmly, ignoring my words. 48 hours to contact your own lawyer and negotiate the return of the money. After that, we will initiate legal proceedings to declare you mentally incompetent to manage your finances and seek the return of assets to the estate. And just so we're clear," Drew added with that smile that made me want to slap him, "we have practically unlimited resources. The Sterling family is very influential in D.C. Very influential. You don't want to face us in court, Catherine. We will destroy you." They left the documents and walked out. I watched the black Mercedes, another Mercedes like David's, drive away down the street. Betty slammed the door so hard the pots on the porch shook. "Mrs. Miller," she said, hands shaking with anger, "that woman, that witch came here with her lover, the day before her husband's funeral." I let myself fall into the armchair. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore. "I know, Betty. I know." "And what are you going to do?" I looked at the documents on the table. I looked toward the study where David's USB drive was. I thought of my son, alone and scared, knowing what was going to happen. "I'm going to fight," I said firmly. "I'm going to fight with everything I have." That afternoon, I called the only lawyer I knew, Robert Bob Newman. Bob was an old friend of my late husband, Frank. They had studied law together at the University of South Carolina 40 years ago. Bob was now almost 70, semi-retired, with a small but respectable office in downtown Charleston. When I told him what had happened, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Catherine," he said finally, "this is very serious. The Sterlings. I know that family. Edward Sterling was an undersecretary in the Treasury Department 10 years ago. He has connections everywhere. You can't face them without preparation." "I'm not facing them, Bob. I'm defending myself." "It's the same thing, dear. In the eyes of the law, it's the same thing. Bob, my son gave me that money 3 days before he died. And there is something else." I paused, not knowing how much I should reveal. I believe David knew he was going to die. And I believe it wasn't an accident." Another silence, heavier this time. "Catherine, are you saying—" "I'm saying I have proof that Melissa was having an affair. I have documents showing financial irregularities, and I have a medical examiner who told me off the record that David's case has inconsistencies." Good God, I could hear him breathing heavily. "Catherine, if this is true, we are talking about something much bigger than an inheritance dispute. We are talking about—" "I know. That's why I need you, Bob. I need the best lawyer I know." I'm semi-retired, Catherine. I haven't taken a major case in 5 years. But you know the law, and you knew Frank, and you cared for David. A sigh. Come to my office tomorrow after the funeral. Bring everything you have. And Catherine, be very careful. If the Sterlings believe you are a threat, they won't hesitate to. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Friday dawned gray and rainy, as if the sky were crying for David. The funeral was at St. Michael's Church, where David had made his first communion, where Frank and I had been married 38 years ago. The church was full. David had been loved. Employees from his company, old friends from college, neighbors, distant relatives. I was in the front pew with Betty to one side. Melissa was at the other end of the bench with Matthew between us. My poor grandson, dressed in a black suit too formal for a 9-year-old, crying silently. I wanted to hug him, comfort him, but Melissa kept him glued to her side like a trophy. Behind Melissa was the entire Sterling family. Edward, the father, an imposing man of 60 with completely white hair and eyes that evaluated you as if you were an asset on a balance sheet. Caroline, the mother, in a Valentino suit and pearls that probably cost more than my house. Jason, the brother, with that shark smile he had inherited from his father. And Drew Silver, sitting discreetly 3 rows back, but with his eyes fixed on Melissa. Father Anthony gave a beautiful sermon about eternal life and God's love. He spoke of David as a good man, a dedicated son, a loving father. He didn't mention that he had died alone, scared, betrayed by the woman he loved. When it came time to pay respects, I approached the closed casket closed, of course, after what the fire had done. I placed my hand on the polished wood. I promise you, I whispered so low only David could hear me. I promise you I will discover the truth. I will protect Matthew, and I will make them pay for what they did to you. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Matthew. Grandma, he sobbed. Can Daddy hear you from heaven? I knelt down, not caring that my 6'2", 3-year-old knees protested, and hugged him tight. Yes, sweetheart. Your daddy will always hear you and will always watch over you. Mom says you have Daddy's money. She says that's bad. My heart split in two. What else does your mom say? She says Daddy was confused, that you manipulated him. But I don't believe it, Grandma. Daddy loved you a lot. Melissa appeared suddenly, grabbing Matthew by the arm. Matthew, come here. There are people who want to offer condolences. At 4 p.m., Betty accompanied me to Bob Newman's office on Broad Street. It was an old building with a wrought iron elevator and worn marble floors. Bob's office was on the 3rd floor, filled with leather-bound law books and the smell of pipe tobacco Bob had smoked for 40 years. Bob received me with a hug. Catherine, I am so sorry. David was a good boy. Thank you, Bob. I sat in a leather chair across from his mahogany desk. Betty remained standing by the door like a guard. All right, Bob said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. Tell me everything from the beginning. And I told him everything. The Sunday dinner, David's words, the USB, the cut video, the documents, Melissa's visit with Drew and the lawyer, the threats. Bob listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes. When I finished, he remained silent for a long moment. This is incredible, Catherine. If this is true, you have the evidence here. I pulled a flash drive from my purse. I copied everything. The video, the documents, everything. Bob plugged the drive into his computer. I saw his face change as he reviewed the files. His expression went from skeptical to serious, and finally to something resembling horror. My God, he murmured. My God, Catherine, there are transfers here for millions, contracts with her brother Jason Sterling's company, consulting services that were clearly never rendered, and these photos. He paused on an image of Melissa and Drew kissing on what looked like the terrace of the Hay Adams Hotel in D.C. The Hay Adams, I said bitterly. How romantic. David and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary there. Bob closed the laptop. Catherine, this is much more serious than I thought. It's not just an affair. It's not just an inheritance dispute. This is corporate fraud on a massive scale. We are talking about a minimum of $4 or $5 million diverted from David's company. And what can we do? First, I need to verify the legality of the transfer of the $12 million. If David made in Times Inter Vivos Times gift with appropriate documentation, that money is yours. David said he had wired it. He didn't mention any formal donation. Then we need to find the lawyer who handled that transfer, and we need to do it before the Sterlings file their lawsuit. He handed me a business card. This is Lucy Montgomery. She is a forensic financial investigator, one of the best. If there is anything shady in David's company finances, she will find it. How much will it cost? Don't worry about that now. Frank was my best friend. David was like a nephew to me. This is personal. That night, after Betty went home, I sat in the study again and reviewed the documents on the USB meticulously. There was something Bob had mentioned that kept spinning in my head. Asterisk, the lawyer who handled the transfer. Asterisk, David had to have used someone to transfer $12 million. It isn't the kind of thing you do online. I searched through the emails. There were hundreds. I opened each one, reading quickly, looking for any reference to lawyers, transfers, bank accounts, and then I found it. An email from David to someone named Times R. Newman asterisk, not my Bob. The email domain was different. Asterisk, Richard, I need you to handle an urgent wire. 12M from my personal account to my mother Catherine Miller's account. I need irrevocable gift documentation. 2 witnesses, everything notarized. Maximum security level. There are people who will try to reverse this when I am gone. Asterisk. The reply was brief. Asterisk, understood, David. I will have it ready for Friday. Are you sure about this? It is a lot of money. Asterisk. David had replied, completely sure. Asterisk, my mother is the only person I trust. If anything happens to me, she will know what to do. Asterisk. The date of the email, Wednesday. 4 days before Sunday dinner. 5 days before his death. I searched for more emails from R. Newman. There weren't many, but they were all about delicate legal matters. It seemed David had used this lawyer for things he wanted to keep out of his company's official records. I found the full name in an attached document. Asterisk Richard Newman, Esquire asterisk. It wasn't the same Robert Newman I knew, but the last name. Could it be a relative? I wrote an email to Bob. Asterisk, Bob, do you know a lawyer named Richard Newman? David used his services for the transfer. Asterisk. The reply came 15 minutes later. Asterisk, Richard is my nephew. Specialized in private banking and wealth management. He works in D.C. Sending you his contact info now. Catherine. Yes. If David used Richard, it means he did this right. Richard is meticulous. Asterisk. I called the number Bob sent, even though it was already 10 p.m. A young man answered on the second ring. Hello? Mr. Newman, my name is Catherine Miller. I am David Miller's mother. A silence. Mrs. Miller, I was expecting your call. I am so terribly sorry for your loss. Thank you, Mr. Newman. I need to know about the transfer you handled for my son. Of course. David gave me very specific instructions. In case anything happened to him, I was to contact you immediately. But Mrs. Miller, are you in a safe place? Is there anyone who can hear this conversation? I am alone in my house. Why? Because what I am about to tell you is going to change everything. My heart beat so hard I could hear it. Tell me, David came to see me 2 weeks ago. He was terrified. He told me he had discovered massive fraud in his company. He told me his wife and her family had been siphoning millions for years. He told me he feared for his life. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. Go on. He asked me to prepare an irrevocable gift of $12 million in your name. I tried to dissuade him. I told him they were extreme measures, but he insisted. He told me, Richard, my mother is the only pure person left in my life. If anything happens to me, she has to be protected financially, and she has to take care of my son. I have the documents here, Mrs. Miller. Signed, notarized, with 2 witnesses. Those $12 million are legally yours. No one can touch them. David made sure of that. There is more. David also gave me instructions that if you contacted me, I should tell you to hire a private investigator named Mark Douglas. David had hired him to investigate his wife. Mr. Douglas has crucial information. He gave me Mark Douglas's number. One more thing, Mrs. Miller. David recorded a full video, 45 minutes long. I have it. He didn't give it to you on the USB because he feared it could be stolen or confiscated. He told me to deliver it to you 1 month after his death, to give you time to process everything. 1 month? Yes. David was very specific. He said the initial shock would overwhelm you and you needed time before seeing the whole truth. The video contains recorded confessions, Mrs. Miller, conversations David recorded in secret, evidence that could send the Sterling family to prison. I want that video now. I understand, but I must respect my client's last will. On April 15th, you will receive that video. In the meantime, contact Mark Douglas. He can start giving you answers. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. David had planned everything. He had known he was going to die and had prepared my defense. I dialed Mark Douglas's number. A man with a deep voice answered. Douglas? Mr. Douglas, my name is Catherine Miller. Richard Newman gave me your number. Mrs. Miller. Finally. I've been waiting for your call for days. Your son hired me 3 months ago to investigate his wife, Melissa Sterling. And what did you find? How much time do you have, ma'am? Because this is going to take a while. It was midnight when Mark Douglas called me back. Mrs. Miller. Are you still awake? I haven't slept in days, I admitted. Tell me what you know. Everything. I heard the sound of papers shuffling on the other end of the line. All right. Your son hired me on December 15th, exactly 3.5 months ago. He came to my office in D.C., paid in cash up front, and asked me to investigate his wife, Melissa Sterling. Why? What did he suspect? At first, he only suspected an affair. He had noticed changes in his wife's behavior. Coming home late, frequent trips to D.C. that had no work justification, strange expenses on credit cards, luxury hotels, expensive restaurants, but she always went alone, according to her. My heart shrank with every word. My poor David. I followed her for 2 weeks, Mark continued, and on January 3rd, I obtained the first solid evidence. I saw her meet a man at the Willard Hotel in D.C. They went in together. Came out 4 hours later. I have photos. Drew Silver, I said in a dull voice. Exactly. You already know him. He came to my house with Melissa after the funeral, claiming to be an investing partner of David's. Mark let out a bitter laugh. Investing partner? How convenient. Mrs. Miller, Drew Silver owns a nightclub in D.C. called Times Onyx Asterisk, a high-end place where rich people go to burn money. The club is losing money rapidly. Silver has gambling debts worth $2 million with very dangerous people. So he needed money, I said slowly, beginning to see the full picture, desperately. And that is where Melissa enters. She met Silver about 1.5 years ago at a business party in D.C. Her brother, Jason Sterling, is a client of the Onyx Club. It was he who introduced them. Jason introduced them? Yes. And here is where it gets interesting. Jason Sterling runs a consulting firm called Times Sterling Associates Asterisk. Do you know how much money that firm has received from Times Miller Logistics Times in the last 2 years? $4.8 million, for strategic consulting services that were never rendered. I reviewed every invoice, every contract. It's all empty words. Market analyses that don't exist. Reports never delivered. It is a scam, Mrs. Miller. And who signed the approval for those payments at Miller Logistics? I already knew the answer. Melissa. She is the CFO. Exactly. Melissa approved payments to her brother's company. The money went to Jason's account. Jason laundered the money through various shell companies, and a significant portion ended up in Drew Silver's hands, supposedly as investments in the Onyx Club. I gasped. How much? In total, I traced approximately $1.5 million that went from David's company through Jason to Drew Silver's accounts, all in the last 18 months. Just when the affair between Melissa and Silver began. My God. She was stealing from my son to give money to her lover. That is exactly what she was doing. And when David started asking questions about the company finances, when he started asking for audits, when he hired an external accountant to review the books, that was when things got dangerous. A chill ran down my spine. Dangerous how? Mrs. Miller, I have recordings. Your son asked me to install recording devices in his own house. He wanted evidence. He wanted to know what Melissa and her family talked about when he wasn't there. And what did he discover? Do you want me to email it to you? It's disturbing. Tell me now. I need to know. A deep sigh. All right. On February 20th, David was supposedly on a business trip in Atlanta, but he was actually in a hotel across Charleston monitoring the recordings from his house. That night, Melissa received a visit from her father, Edward Sterling. What did they say? Edward asked her if David had discovered anything. Melissa said yes, that David had hired an accountant and was asking too many questions. Edward replied, and I quote, "Then we will have to neutralize the problem before it is too late." The words hit me like a fist in the stomach. Neutralize the problem. They were talking about killing my son. That is what David thought. That's why he called me that same night, completely terrified. He told me he was going to transfer all the money he could to you, that he was going to document everything, and that if anything happened to him, I was to deliver all the evidence to you. Do you have the recordings? I have them. And there is more, Mrs. Miller. Much more. The next morning, at 8 sharp, Mark Douglas arrived at my house. He was a man of about 50, robust, with the weathered face of someone who has spent too many hours surveilling in dark cars. He carried a black briefcase and a serious expression. Betty served him coffee while he spread documents out on my dining room table. Mrs. Miller, what I am about to show you is the work of 3 months of intensive investigation. Your son paid very well for this, and I gave him results. He opened the briefcase and pulled out several thick folders. Folder number 1, The Affair. Here I have dated photos of Melissa and Drew Silver on 7 different occasions. Hotels, restaurants, even a weekend in Hilton Head that Melissa told David was a yoga retreat with friends. He opened the folder. The photos were devastating. Melissa and Drew kissing, entering hotel rooms together on the beach. Her in a bikini, him with his arm around her waist, my daughter-in-law, my grandson's mother, betraying my son in the cruelest way. Folder number 2, The Financial Fraud. Here I have bank statements, fake invoices, emails between Melissa and Jason coordinating the payments. Look at this. He showed me a particularly incriminating email from Melissa Sterling to Jason Sterling. Date, January 15th. Subject, next payment. Asterisk, Jason. David is starting to ask questions about payments to your firm. I'm going to have to space them out more. The next one will be just $200K instead of $300K. Drew will have to wait a little longer for his share. He is pressuring me, but I can't risk David suspecting more. Asterisk. Jason's reply. Asterisk, calm down. Dad says he will handle David if he becomes a real problem. In the meantime, keep playing the role of perfect wife. Asterisk. My stomach churned. Folder number 3, Mark continued. This is the most important one. The day of David's death. He opened a red folder. Your son called me at 10 p.m. on March 15th. He was in his car driving toward D.C. He told me he had a secret meeting with an investigative journalist. He was going to hand over copies of all the fraud evidence. He wanted it to go public. Which journalist? His name is Alan Roberts. He works for Times, The Washington Post *, specialized in financial corruption. David had sent him a preview of the information, and Alan wanted more. They agreed to meet at 1 a.m. at a rest area on I-95 near Richmond. But David never made it to that meeting, I said slowly. No, his car went off the road at 11:47 p.m., according to the police report, just 20 miles from the meeting point. Dr. Grant told me there were sedatives in his blood. Mark nodded gravely. Lorazepam, a very high dose. David never took sedatives, right? Never. Not even Tylenol if he could avoid it. Exactly. Someone drugged your son, Mrs. Miller, and then either caused the accident or took advantage of David being incapacitated to run him off the road. Tears ran down my cheeks, but I didn't bother wiping them. Who? Who did it? I don't have definitive proof yet, but I have suspicions. Drew Silver has connections with dangerous people, hired muscle. David was about to ruin their whole plan, the money, the relationship with Melissa, everything. With David dead and Melissa inheriting the company, Drew would have unlimited access to the funds. But Edward Sterling also had motives, I said, remembering the email. He said he would handle David. Edward is a former politician with connections at every level. A traffic accident is easy to arrange when you know the right people. And the case was closed very quickly, right? No full autopsy, no deep investigation. Dr. Grant said there was political pressure. Mark closed the folders. Mrs. Miller, your son was murdered. I don't have evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Not yet. But I have enough circumstantial evidence to raise serious suspicions. And with the financial fraud documented, we can start pressuring the Sterling family. How? Giving all this to his lawyer, Bob Newman, right? He's good. I know him by reputation. With this evidence, he can do two things. 1. Prove that the $12 million David wired you was perfectly legal and justified because he was protecting his assets from a wife who was robbing him. And 2. File criminal charges against Melissa, Jason, and possibly Edward for corporate fraud. And about the murder? That is more complicated. We need more. We need someone on the inside to talk. We need phone records, suspicious money movements around the date of death, connections between Edward or Drew and potential hitmen. I am working on it, but it will take time. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the yard. The jasmine was in full bloom, filling the air with its sweet scent. David had planted that jasmine vine when he was 8. My son knew they were going to kill him, I said with a broken voice. That's why he gave me the money. That's why he recorded everything. He knew he wasn't going to survive, but he wanted to make sure they didn't get away with it either. Your son was a brave man, Mrs. Miller, and very smart. He gave us all the tools we need to destroy that family. I turned to him. Then let's do it. Let's destroy them. That afternoon, Betty, Mark Douglas, and I met with Bob Newman in his office. Also present was a woman Bob had invited, Lucy Montgomery. Lucy was about 45, short dark hair, red-rimmed glasses, and an expression that said she didn't put up with nonsense. She wore a gray pantsuit and carried a briefcase that turned out to be full of financial reports. Mrs. Miller, she said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. Bob has filled me in. I've spent 3 days reviewing Miller Logistics' finances. It's worse than we thought. We sat around Bob's conference table. Lucy opened her laptop and projected a presentation on the wall. All right, this is what I've found. Miller Logistics is or was a very profitable company. Annual revenue of approximately $20 million with profit margins of 25%. That means the company generated about $5 million in net profit per year. Impressive, Bob murmured. It was, until the Sterling family started bleeding it dry. Here is the breakdown. She changed the slide. Payments to Times Sterling Associates times Jason Sterling's firm $4.8 million in 2 years. All approved by Melissa Sterling, CFO. Special insurance contracts with a company called Times Onyx Insurance, times $800,000. Guess who owns Onyx Insurance? Drew Silver, I said. Exactly. A shell company that provides no real service. Representation expenses that went directly to Melissa's personal credit cards, $300,000. Luxury hotels, restaurants, designer clothes, all charged to the company. And finally, the most interesting part. A loan of $2 million the company made to a company called Times Mediterranean Investments, LLC, *. Do you know who is behind Mediterranean Investments? We shook our heads. Edward Sterling, the father. The company is registered under a straw man, but tracing the money movements, it all leads to Edward. Bob whistled low. In total, Lucy continued, the Sterling family has extracted approximately $8 million from David's company in the last 2.5 years. If this continues, Miller Logistics will be bankrupt in less than a year. And David knew all this? I asked. Oh, yes. I found emails where David questioned these expenses. Here is one particularly revealing one sent to Melissa 2 months ago. She read from her screen. Melissa, I need a full explanation of payments to your brother's firm. I have reviewed the supposed consulting reports, and they are basically copy and paste from articles available on the internet. I am not going to approve more payments until this is cleared up. Melissa's response. David, my brother is a respected professional. If you don't trust my family, maybe we should talk about whether this marriage has a future. She threatened him with divorce to stop him investigating, I said, feeling the rage grow inside me. Exactly, Lucy confirmed, and it worked temporarily. David stopped questioning publicly, but started investigating in secret. He hired Mark, hired an external forensic accountant, and started moving liquid assets out of Melissa's reach. The $12 million he gave me, I said, among other things. I also found that David opened accounts in Switzerland and moved another $5 million there and put the company shares in a trust with his son Matthew as beneficiary. But with you, Mrs. Miller, as trustee until Matthew turns 25. My heart swelled with pride. My son, even facing death, had planned meticulously to protect the two people he loved most, his mother and his son. Bob leaned forward. So, recapping, we have solid evidence of corporate fraud. We have evidence of adultery. We have evidence that David acted rationally and with full knowledge when transferring those assets. What else do we need? Mark Douglas spoke for the first time since the meeting began. We need to anticipate their next move. The Sterlings will file their lawsuit in. How much time? I looked at my watch. It had been almost 48 hours since Melissa came to my house with her threats. They probably already filed it, Bob said. Let me call the courthouse. He left the room, returned 5 minutes later with a serious face. They filed it this morning. Lawsuit for return of assets valued at $12 million. They argue that David was in a deteriorated mental state due to work stress, that you exerted undue influence over him, and they request an evaluation of your mental capacity to manage funds of such magnitude. They are asking for an emergency conservatorship. Basically, Lucy translated, they are saying you are a senile old woman who manipulated her dying son. The rage I felt was almost physical. When is the hearing? They have scheduled it as urgent. They have influence. Remember? The preliminary hearing is in 5 days. Friday. 5 days, I repeated. Is that enough time to prepare our defense? Bob smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that just smelled blood in the water. Catherine, in 5 days we aren't just going to defend, we are going to attack. 2 days before the hearing, I received a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Miller? It was a young woman's voice, scared. Yes. Who is this? My name is Sophie. I used to work as a secretary at times, Sterling Associates *, Jason Sterling's firm. My heart started beating faster. Why are you calling me, Sophie? Because I know what they did to Mr. David, and it isn't right. He was a good man. He came to the office sometimes. He was always kind to me. And they talked about him like he was garbage. What do you know exactly? I know everything. I made the fake invoices. Jason forced me. He said if I didn't do it, he would fire me and make sure I never worked in D.C. again. I have copies of everything. Mrs. Miller. Invoices, emails, recordings of meetings where they planned how to get more money out of Mr. David's company. I could hardly breathe. Why are you telling me this now, Sophie? A silence. Because this morning Jason came to the office drunk. He was celebrating. He said the old lady was going to lose in court, that they were going to get the money back, and that with David dead they finally had total control of Miller Logistics. And then his phone rang. He talked to someone for a few minutes and then hung up and told his father, Mr. Edward, that they had just confirmed the matter was closed. Mr. Edward raised his glass and toasted to resolving problems permanently. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. They were talking about killing my son, I whispered. They didn't say it directly, but Mrs. Miller, I was in the office the night of March 15th, the night Mr. David died. I saw Jason make a phone call at 9 p.m. He said exactly this. He is on his way, alone. He should be in your area around midnight. He cannot make it to that meeting, understand? And the person on the other end must have confirmed something, because Jason hung up and smiled and told his personal secretary Maria to go home early, that it was going to be an important night. I was crying now, tears of rage and pain. Will you testify to this in court? I'm scared, Mrs. Miller. The Sterling family is powerful. They could hurt me. We will protect you. My lawyer Robert Newman will protect you. Please, Sophie, my son deserves justice. A long silence. I could hear her breathing fast and shallow, struggling with the decision. Okay, she said finally. I'll do it. But I need guarantees. I need protection. You will have it. Where are you now? In D.C. In my apartment. I haven't gone to work since yesterday. I'm afraid they know I'm talking. Stay where you are. I'm going to send someone to pick you up. Mark Douglas is a private investigator. He will bring you to Charleston safely and take you to my lawyer. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Your son. He didn't deserve what happened to him. I know, honey. I know. 12 hours later, Mark Douglas arrived at my house with a young woman of about 25. She was petite, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, huge brown eyes filled with fear, carrying a backpack that seemed to contain all her possessions. Mrs. Miller, she said with a trembling voice, Thank you for helping me. I hugged her. She was just a kid who had been trapped in a web of corruption and who had finally found the courage to escape. You are helping us, Sophie. You are very brave. Betty made her tea and something to eat while Mark and I reviewed the documents she had brought. It was pure gold. Invoices with Jason's signature admitting they were fictitious but necessary for cash flow. Emails between Jason and Melissa coordinating exactly how much money to withdraw each month so as not to raise suspicions. Recordings of meetings where Edward Sterling gave specific instructions on how to manage David if he became a problem. And most incriminating, a log of phone calls from Jason's office mobile the night of March 15th. The 9 p.m. call Sophie had mentioned had been to an unregistered number. Mark, I said, can you trace this number? I can try. It's probably a burner phone, but maybe I can find something. Sophie finished her tea and looked at us with tired eyes. There is something else you should know. 3 weeks ago, I heard Jason talking on the phone with someone about securing full access after David's problem was resolved. The person on the other end must have been asking about the boy, Matthew, because Jason said full custody for Melissa. The grandmother can visit him once a month if she's lucky. Once we have control of the company and assets, the old woman doesn't matter. I felt like I had been punched. They were going to take Matthew from me. They were going to take everything from you, Mrs. Miller. Your money, your grandson, your dignity. They wanted to leave you with nothing. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting over Charleston, dyeing the sky orange and pink. Well, they were wrong, I said with a voice of steel, because I'm going to take everything from them first. I couldn't sleep Thursday night. Tomorrow was the hearing. Tomorrow I would have to face Melissa, her family, her army of expensive lawyers. I was sitting in the living room at 3 a.m. when my phone rang. It was Richard Newman, David's lawyer who had handled the $12 million transfer. Mrs. Miller, I know it's late, but I thought you would want to know this immediately. What is it? I just received a threatening call. A man who didn't identify himself told me that if I testified tomorrow about David's gift, there would be serious consequences for my career. My God. Are you going to stop testifying? Of course not. But I thought you should know that they are scared, Mrs. Miller. They are scared enough to resort to threats, which means they know they are going to lose. Be careful, Richard. I will be. And you too. These people are dangerous. They already proved they are willing to kill. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. Betty, who had heard my half of the conversation from the kitchen, entered with 2 cups of chamomile tea. Mrs. Miller, you should try to rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. I can't, Betty. Every time I close my eyes, I see David. I see his face in that video. Knowing he was going to die. Knowing his wife was betraying him. And I couldn't save him. It is not your fault, Betty said firmly, sitting beside me and taking my hand. You didn't know. But now you do know. And tomorrow you are going to fight for him. You are going to get him the justice he deserves. And if I lose? And if their lawyers are better? And if the judge believes I am just a confused old woman, then you will fight again. And again. And again. Because that is what mothers do. We don't give up. She was right. Of course she was right. I drank my tea and finally, around 5 a.m., managed to sleep for 2 hours. I dreamed of David. He was 8 years old again, playing in the yard with a soccer ball. He smiled at me and shouted, "Look, Mom, look what I can do." And I watched, full of pride and love. When I woke up, I knew what I had to do. David was watching me from wherever he was, and I wasn't going to let him down. The Charleston County Probate Court wasn't an impressive building. It was modern, functional, with linoleum floors and fluorescent lights that gave everything a clinical look. I arrived at 9 a.m., half an hour before the hearing. Bob had advised me to arrive early to establish presence. I wore a simple black suit, the same one I had worn for the funeral. Nothing ostentatious. I wanted to look like what I was, a grieving mother, not a rich and greedy woman. Bob was waiting for me at the entrance with Lucy and Mark. Ready? Bob asked. As ready as I can be. Remember, Catherine, let me talk. Don't respond to provocations. Keep calm no matter what they say. We entered the courtroom, and there they were. Melissa, sitting in the front row on the opposite side, dressed in black like me, but her suit probably cost 10 times more. Beside her, Edward Sterling in a charcoal gray suit and an expression of absolute confidence. Caroline, her mother, with pearls and arrogance. Jason, with that shark smile that made me want to slap him. And behind them, a team of 5 lawyers in impeccable suits led by Oliver Stanton. We looked at each other across the room. Melissa didn't look away. Her eyes were dry, cold, calculating. I held her gaze. I wasn't going to cower. The door at the back opened, and the judge entered. She was a woman of about 55, short gray hair, severe face, eyes that missed nothing. Judge Margaret Owens, according to Bob, known for being tough but fair. All rise. Good morning, she said with a firm voice. Preliminary hearing in case number 28847-2024, Sterling versus Miller. Please be seated. We all took our seats. Mr. Stanton, it is your petition. Proceed with opening statements. Oliver Stanton stood up, buttoning his jacket with a practiced movement. Thank you, Your Honor. This is a tragic case of elder manipulation. Mrs. Catherine Miller, 63 years old, taking advantage of the deteriorated mental state of her son, David Miller, convinced him to transfer $12 million to her only days before his tragic death in a traffic accident. Mrs. Miller, a widow living on modest income from her retired teacher's pension, suddenly finds herself with access to a fortune that legally belongs to the marital estate of her late son and his wife, my client, Mrs. Melissa Sterling Miller. We have evidence that Mr. David Miller was under extreme stress in the weeks prior to his death, working 18 hours a day, showing signs of exhaustion. In that vulnerable state, his mother, who had called him obsessively every day, exerted undue influence. Furthermore, Your Honor, given the circumstances and Mrs. Miller's age, we respectfully request an evaluation of her capacity to manage funds of such magnitude. A woman of her age, without experience in finance, suddenly in charge of $12 million, is a recipe for disaster. We ask for an emergency conservatorship. He sat down with a satisfied smile. The rage boiled inside me. Asterisk, elder manipulation. Undue influence. Asterisk, I felt Bob's hand on my arm, a silent warning. Asterisk, breathe. Stay calm. Asterisk. Mr. Newman, Judge Owens said, your response. Bob stood up, moved slowly, deliberately. There was something in his demeanor that changed the atmosphere of the room. Your Honor, my colleague has painted a very colorful portrait, but as with all good fiction, it crumbles before the facts. First, the basic facts. David Miller did not transfer $12 million to his mother in a moment of confusion. He executed an irrevocable gift, prepared and notarized by a lawyer specializing in private banking, with 2 witnesses present, and with full knowledge of the legal consequences. I have here the deed of gift duly signed and sealed. Bob placed the document on the judge's bench. Second, Mr. David Miller was not confused nor under stress affecting his judgment regarding his mother. In fact, he was acting with remarkable mental clarity. Why? Because he had discovered that his wife, Mrs. Melissa Sterling, was stealing from him. A murmur ran through the room. Melissa turned pale. Oliver Stanton jumped up. Objection! Your Honor, this is outrageous. There is no basis for such an accusation. No? Bob said calmly. Allow me to present Exhibit A, bank statements showing payments of $4.8 million from Miller Logistics to Times Sterling Associates Times in 2 years, all approved by Mrs. Melissa Sterling in her capacity as CFO. Exhibit B, invoices for those alleged consulting services. Invoices that, according to forensic analysis performed by Mrs. Lucy Montgomery, a certified financial investigator, are completely fictitious. Lucy stood briefly and nodded to the judge. Exhibit C, dated photographs of Mrs. Melissa Sterling with Mr. Drew Silver in compromising situations, including hotel reservations while Mrs. Sterling was supposedly on business trips. Bob projected the photos on a screen. The room went completely silent. Melissa stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Edward Sterling whispered furiously to Oliver Stanton. And finally, Your Honor, the proof of recorded testimony from an eyewitness who worked at Sterling Associates and who has direct knowledge of the fraud. Sophie entered the room escorted by a bailiff. She was pale but steady. Judge Owens looked at her with interest. Is this the witness? Yes, Your Honor. Miss Sophie Ramirez, formerly secretary at Sterling Associates. Sophie was sworn in and sat on the stand. Her voice shook, but she spoke clearly. She told everything. The fake invoices Jason forced her to create, the conversations she had heard, the phone call the night David died. When she finished, the silence in the room was absolute. Judge Owens looked at Oliver Stanton. Do you wish to cross-examine the witness? Oliver stood up, but for the first time, he seemed unsure. Your Honor, this witness clearly has a bias. She was fired by my client. I wasn't fired, Sophie interrupted. I resigned because I couldn't continue being part of a fraud. Oliver tried several lines of questioning, but Sophie held firm. She had documents backing every claim. Finally, he gave up and sat down. Judge Owens reclined in her chair. Very well. We have heard enough for today. But before suspending this hearing, I want to make something very clear. She looked directly at Melissa and her family. This court does not tolerate fraud. If credible evidence of corporate malfeasance exists, it will be referred to the district attorney for criminal investigation. And regarding the petition for return of assets, she paused, reviewing the documents Bob had presented. The deed of gift appears to be in order. I see no legal basis to annul it. But I am going to give both parties 2 weeks to submit full arguments in writing. Hearing adjourned. She banged the gavel. I had won. At least for now. When we left the courtroom, Edward Sterling blocked my path. This isn't over, he hissed. You think you've won, you stupid old woman, but you've only managed to anger us. Bob stepped between us. Mr. Sterling, I suggest you do not threaten my client in a courthouse building. It's not a threat. It's a promise. He walked away with his family following him like an entourage. Melissa was the last to leave. She stopped in front of me. You will never see Matthew again, she said with an icy voice. I will make sure of it. Those words pierced my heart like a knife. But before I could respond, she was gone. Bob put a hand on my shoulder. Catherine, you just won the first battle, but the war has just begun. I know, I said, watching the Sterling family walk down the hallway. And I am ready. The 2 weeks following the preliminary hearing were a roller coaster of emotions. Bob and Lucy worked day and night preparing the full case. Mark Douglas had traced the phone number of Jason's suspicious call. It was a prepaid mobile bought with cash at a gas station in D.C. Impossible to trace beyond that. But the circumstance itself was incriminating. Sophie was hidden in a safe house Mark had organized. She had received 2 more threatening calls, but she stood firm in her decision to testify. And I tried to maintain some kind of normalcy amidst the chaos. I visited David's grave every day. He was buried in Magnolia Cemetery under an oak tree. I brought fresh flowers and talked to him, telling him about the case's progress, about how much I missed him. It was a Tuesday afternoon, almost 7, when Betty called me from downstairs. Mrs. Miller, you have a visitor. Who is it? I'm not expecting anyone. A pause. It is Mrs. Melissa, and she is alone. My heart sped up. Melissa, alone. Without her army of expensive lawyers, without her family, without Drew. I went down the stairs slowly. Betty was at the front door, with her arms crossed in a protective stance. She can leave if she wants, I told her quietly. I'm not going anywhere, she responded firmly. Melissa was on the threshold, and I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't wearing one of her designer suits. She wore simple jeans, a wrinkled white blouse, and sneakers. Her hair, normally styled to perfection, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore no makeup, and I could see dark circles under her red eyes. She seemed to have aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Catherine, she said with a hoarse voice, can we talk, please? Alone. I looked at Betty, who shook her head imperceptibly. But something in Melissa's eyes, a desperation, a genuine pain I hadn't seen before, made me hesitate. It's okay, Betty. Can you wait in the kitchen? I'll yell if I need you. I led Melissa to the living room. We sat on opposite ends of the sofa, an abyss of pain and betrayal between us. "What do you want, Melissa?" She wrung her hands, looking at the floor. I need you to know the truth before everything explodes completely." "The truth? Which of your truths? The one you told David while you were stealing from him? The one you told the judge?" "I deserve that," she said with a broken voice. "I deserve all your hatred. But please listen to me. Just this once." I crossed my arms. "You have 5 minutes." Melissa took a deep breath like someone about to jump into a void. "I never loved David," she began, and the words hit me like slaps. Not the way he deserved to be loved, and that is what hurts me most now. My father forced me to marry him. I was 25, had just finished my MBA. I was in love with someone else, but that man was nobody important. A college professor. No money, no connections. My father said it was unacceptable. David was the perfect target. Young, handsome, smart, with a growing company. My father saw an opportunity. And I was too cowardly to refuse. She wiped tears with the back of her hand. The first years weren't terrible. David was good to me, kind, patient. He tried to make me happy, even though he knew I didn't love him. We had Matthew, and for a while, I thought it might work, that I could learn to love him. But my father never stopped pressuring. "Use your position," he would tell me. "David's company could be very useful for the family." At first, I refused, but Jason was in financial trouble. He had gambling debts. My father said if I didn't help, Jason could end up dead. So, I started approving payments to Jason's company. Just small ones at first. $50,000 here, $100,000 there. David trusted me. He never questioned my financial decisions. And that made it easier to betray him. Rage bubbled inside me, but I forced myself to listen. "And then I met Drew," she continued, voice full of self-pity. "It was at a party Jason organized. Drew was everything David wasn't. Dangerous, exciting, passionate. He made me feel alive for the first time in years. I didn't know I was being used. Drew told me he loved me, that he wanted to build a life with me. I was so stupid. I told him about David's company, about the money, and he saw an opportunity. It was Drew who suggested the insurance contracts with his shell company. It was he who convinced me to take out more money. He said when we had enough, we could run away together. Start a new life with Matthew." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. But when David started investigating, when he hired that accountant, everything crumbled. Drew changed. He became aggressive, threatening. He told me if I didn't find a way to stop David, he would expose me too. And my father, her voice broke completely. My father found out everything. He came to my house and told me with that cold voice he has, "This mess you have created could ruin the whole family. I am going to fix it." I asked him what he was going to do, and he just said, "You don't ask. You just go on with your life as if nothing happened." She looked up with red, swollen eyes. 3 days later, David died. And I knew my father had done it. He didn't tell me directly, but the night of the funeral, when we were alone, he whispered, "The problem is resolved. Now get that money back," he wired to his mother, "and let's move on." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you saying you didn't know they were going to kill David?" "No," she shouted. "I never wanted that. I swear. I thought my father was going to—" "I don't know," scared David. "Threaten him legally. Something. But kill him? Catherine, please, you have to believe me. I never wanted David to die." "Why should I believe you?" "You've lied about everything else." "Because," she said with a desperate voice, "because the night David died, he called me at 10. I was in D.C. with Drew. David told me he knew everything. The affair, the money, everything. He told me he was going to divorce me, that he was going to take custody of Matthew, that he was going to expose everything publicly, and I begged him. I told him I was sorry, that I would end it with Drew, that I would return the money. But he just said, 'Melissa, you did this to yourself. Goodbye.' Those were the last words he said to me. Goodbye. As if he knew. As if he knew he wasn't going to see me again." She was weeping openly now, and for the first time since David's death, I felt something resembling compassion for this woman, but only a little. "Why are you telling me this now, Melissa? Why come here?" "Because," she said, wiping her face, "because my father told me yesterday that they are going to blame me for everything. Jason, too. They are going to say the fraud was my idea, that I pressured David, that I organized his death. My own father is going to sacrifice me to save himself, and Drew has disappeared. He doesn't answer my calls. I think my father paid him to leave. He is probably in Argentina or Brazil now with enough money to start over. I am alone, Catherine. My father betrayed me. Drew used me and abandoned me. And David, the only good man in my life. And I destroyed him." She knelt in front of me, tears falling onto my hands. "I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But please, please help me protect Matthew. My father wants full custody. He wants to control his inheritance. Use him like he has used all of us. Don't let him do that to my son." I looked at her. This broken woman. This woman who had betrayed my son, but who perhaps had also been a victim of the same monster who killed him. "Will you testify against your father?" I asked. "If Bob files criminal charges against Edward for David's murder, will you testify about what you know?" Her face went pale. "He is my father, and David was my son, and your husband, and Matthew's father. Are you going to protect the man who killed him?" A long, long silence. Finally, she nodded. "Yes, I will testify. For Matthew. And because David deserved better than me." The day arrived like a whisper. 1 month. 30 days since my son had died. 30 days of pain, rage, fighting, and now, a strange hope. Richard Newman had called me the night before. "Mrs. Miller, tomorrow is April 15th, the day David specified for you to receive the full video. Do you want me to bring it to you personally?" "Yes, please, Mrs. Miller. Prepare yourself. It is difficult to watch. David was very upset when he recorded it." At 10 a.m., Richard arrived at my house with a sealed manila envelope. "This is a copy. The original is in a bank safety deposit box under your name now." David was very careful with everything. I called Bob and Betty. I wanted them to be with me when I saw it. We sat in the living room, curtains drawn, the outside world blocked out. I inserted the flash drive into my laptop and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, and there was my David. The image showed David sitting in his office, but not at his usual desk. He was in a corner, in a simple chair with a white wall behind him. The lighting was bad, as if he had recorded this in a rush. He wore a wrinkled gray t-shirt. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were red, and there was an intensity in them I had never seen. He looked directly at the camera, directly at me, and began to speak. "Hi, Mom. If you are watching this, it means 30 days have passed since my death. Richard kept his promise." "Good." His voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor underneath. "First of all, I want you to know something. I love you. I have loved you every day of my life. You were the best mother a son could ask for. Everything I achieved because you gave me the tools. You sold your apartment to fund my company. I will never forget that sacrifice." Tears were already streaming down my face. "And now, I am going to ask you for one last sacrifice. I am going to ask you to be strong, stronger than you have ever been, because what I am about to tell you is going to break your heart. But you need to know. You need to know the truth." He got up and walked out of the frame for a moment. When he returned, he had papers in his hand. 3 months ago, I discovered Melissa was being unfaithful. At first, I didn't want to believe it, but I hired a private investigator, Mark Douglas. He confirmed my worst suspicions. But that wasn't the worst, Mom. The worst was discovering she had been stealing from me, she and her family, millions of dollars for years. And I was so stupid. I trusted her completely. I never checked her work as CFO. I believed she was meticulous, efficient. She was times efficient, efficiently criminal. His laugh was bitter, humorless. When I confronted Melissa 2 weeks ago, she admitted everything. The affair, the money, everything. She cried and told me she was sorry, that her father had forced her, that Drew had manipulated her, that if I gave her another chance, she would fix everything. And Mom, for a moment, I almost believed her. Because I wanted to believe her. I wanted Matthew to have an intact family. I wanted our marriage to be salvageable. But then, I received a call from Sophie, Jason's secretary. She told me she had to meet me urgently. She gave me documents, Mom. Documents showing the fraud was much worse than I thought. And recordings. He stopped and pulled out a small device. It looked like a digital voice recorder. I am going to play one of those recordings now. It is a conversation between Edward Sterling and Jason Sterling recorded a week ago in the office of Sterling Associates. Sophie hid a recording device after Jason threatened her. She feared for her safety and wanted evidence. David pressed a button on the recorder. Edward Sterling's voice filled the room. Cold, calculating, monstrous. Edward. The problem with David is getting out of control. He has hired an outside accountant, a damn forensic accountant. He is going to find everything. Jason. What do you want me to do, Dad? Beg him? Edward. Don't be an idiot. David isn't going to listen to pleas. He has proven to be more troublesome than I anticipated. I thought being my son-in-law we could manage him, but he has proven to have a spine. Jason. Melissa says he is talking about divorce. About taking Matthew. Edward. Then we have no choice. I am going to call a person. Someone discreet. These kinds of problems have permanent solutions. Jason. Dad. Are you saying? Edward. I am saying David Miller is not going to get to file any lawsuit. And if you ask how, you are stupider than I thought. The important thing is that it looks like an accident. The man is stressed, working too much, driving tired. These things happen. The recording ended. I felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. David on the screen had tears in his eyes. You heard them, Mom. My father-in-law ordered my murder, and he did it with the same casualness with which he would order dinner. After hearing that, I knew I didn't have much time. That's why I wired the money to your account. That's why I prepared all the evidence. That's why I'm recording this. Tonight, in a few hours, I am going to meet a journalist from Times The Washington Post, I am going to give him copies of everything. The story will be published. Edward and his family will go to prison, and Matthew will be safe. Or at least, that was the plan. He rubbed his face with his hands. But Mom, there is a part of me that knows I am not going to make it to that meeting. Edward is too powerful. He has too many resources. If he ordered my death, he has probably already put the plan in motion. That is why I am recording this. Because if I don't make it to tomorrow, I need you to know it wasn't an accident. I need you to promise you will fight, that you won't let Edward get away with it, that you will protect Matthew. And Mom, I need you to know that I love you, that I am sorry for not being more careful. I am sorry for putting you in this position. I am sorry you are going to have to be stronger than anyone should ever be. But if there is anyone who can do this, it's you. The woman who sold everything she had to give me a chance. The woman who raised me alone after Dad died. The strongest woman I know. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes filling the screen. I love you, Mom. Always. And please, take care of my son. Teach him to be good, like you taught me. Don't let him become them. And if you can, if one day you can forgive Melissa, she isn't totally bad. Just weak. Too weak to resist her father, just as I wasn't strong enough to protect her from him. Goodbye, Mom, until we meet again. The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute. Betty was sobbing openly. Bob had his head in his hands. Richard looked at the floor. And I felt a rage, so pure, so crystalline, that it was almost peaceful. Bob, I said with a voice I didn't recognize as mine, I want Edward Sterling to spend the rest of his life in prison, no matter the cost, no matter how long it takes. That man ordered the murder of my son, and I am going to make sure he pays. Bob looked up. There was fire in his eyes. With this recording, Catherine, he's not only going to prison, I am going to destroy him completely. The case went national. After Bob presented Edward's recording to the district attorney, the media exploded. Contract killing in political family. former undersecretary, implicated in businessman's death. Asterisk, asterisk, the scandal-shaking D. C. Elite, asterisk. Edward Sterling, Jason Sterling, and Drew Silver, who had been captured trying to board a flight to Buenos Aires from Miami, were formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, RICO, wire fraud, and money laundering. Melissa, keeping her promise, had testified before the grand jury. In exchange for her cooperation, she was offered partial immunity. She would be charged only with complicity in fraud, not murder. The trial was held at the U.S. District Court in D.C., a huge courtroom filled with journalists, TV cameras, spectators. I sat in the front row with Betty on one side and Bob on the other. Opposite, separated by marshals, were Edward and Jason. Edward wore an impeccable suit, but there was something broken in his eyes. For the first time, he looked like a scared old man, not a titan of power. Jason looked at the floor, unable to look up. Drew Silver, handcuffed, had bruises on his face apparently. He had resisted arrest. The judge was a man of about 60, with a reputation for being ruthless on elite corruption. Judge Emilio Castillo. "Prosecution may begin," he said gravely. The prosecutor was a brilliant 40-year-old woman named Patricia Patty Moore. Tall, elegant, with a mind like a steel trap. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case of greed, betrayal, and premeditated murder. I am going to prove that Edward Sterling, with the help of his son Jason Sterling and accomplice Andrew Silver, orchestrated the murder of David Miller to cover up massive fraud and maintain control over millions of dollars." Over the next 3 days, Patty built a devastating case. She presented the bank statements showing the diverted millions. She presented the recordings, both the one David had received from Sophie and others Mark Douglas had obtained through additional investigation. She presented the testimony of Dr. Stephen Grant, the medical examiner, who explained the inconsistencies in David's death, the sedatives in the blood, the pre-mortem contusions, the suspicious vehicle trajectory, and then she called Melissa to the stand. Melissa took the stand with a hesitant step. She wore a simple black suit, no jewelry, no makeup. She seemed to have lost 20 pounds. Edward looked at her with pure hatred. She didn't return his gaze. "Mrs. Sterling Miller," Patty began, "can you tell us what your relationship was with the deceased, David Miller?" "He was my husband," Melissa said in a voice barely audible, "for 10 years. And during those 10 years, were you faithful to your husband?" A long pause. "No. I cannot explain. I had an affair with Andrew Silver for approximately a year and a half before David's death." "And your father, Edward Sterling, knew of this affair?" "Yes. I told him because I needed his advice when David started to suspect." "And what did your father tell you?" Melissa breathed shakily. "He told me to keep David quiet by any means necessary. Those were his exact words." "Did you understand what that meant?" "No. At that moment I thought he was talking about bribes, maybe, or legal threats. I didn't think—" Her voice broke. "I didn't think he would kill my husband." A murmur ran through the room. Edward jumped to his feet. "Lies. They are all lies from a desperate adulteress." The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Sterling, sit down or you will be removed from the court." Patty continued relentlessly. "Mrs. Sterling, can you tell us what happened the night of March 15th, the night your husband died?" Melissa wiped her tears. "I was in D.C., with Drew at his apartment. Around 10 p.m. my phone rang. It was David. He told me he knew everything. The affair, the money, everything. He said he was going to divorce me and expose everything publicly. After he hung up, I panicked. I called my father. I told him what David had said. And my father just said, 'Don't worry, I will handle it.' And what did you think that meant?" "Honestly, I don't know. I wanted to believe he was going to convince David somehow. But deep down, I think I knew. I think I always knew what my father was capable of." "Why do you say that?" Melissa looked at Edward for the first time. "Because when I was 12, I saw my father beat a man almost to death, a business partner who had betrayed him. He broke 3 ribs and a jaw. And then, when the man threatened to go to the police, my father made him disappear. He was never found." My father told me never to speak of it, that it was business, and I, a scared little girl, obeyed. So yes. When my father said he would handle David, deep down I knew what it meant. Edward was pale as death, Patty continued. And what happened after that phone call? A few hours later, around 2 a.m., my father called me. He said, "The problem is resolved. David had a traffic accident. He is dead. Now behave like a grieving widow and get back that damn money he wired to his mother." She pulled out a tissue and blew her nose. Those were his exact words. Behave like a grieving widow. Like it was a role to play. And I did. I acted like a grieving widow. I went to Catherine's house with lawyers and demanded the money. I faked pain I didn't feel. And all the while I knew my father had killed my husband. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Melissa looked at the jury. "Because I am a coward. Because I was afraid of my father. And because a part of me told myself that maybe it really had times been an accident. That my father couldn't have done something so monstrous. But I knew the truth. And, finally, when I saw what they were doing to Catherine, a woman who never did anything bad to me, I finally found some courage." Patty nodded. No further questions. Edward's lawyer, an expensive man from New York, tried to destroy Melissa's testimony. He accused her of lying to save her own skin, of inventing stories about her father, but Melissa stood firm on every point. After Melissa, Sophie took the stand. She repeated what she had said in the preliminary hearing, but with more detail. But then Patty revealed something new. "Miss Ramirez, did you find anything else after you left Sterling Associates?" "Yes. Before leaving, I copied all the files from Jason's computer to an external hard drive. There were thousands of documents. And what did you find in those documents?" "I found an email sent by Edward Sterling to a Gmail account I didn't recognize. It was from March 14th, the day before Mr. David's death." "Can you read the email?" Sophie pulled out a paper and read with a trembling voice. Asterisk, "Target moves tomorrow night around 23:30 on I-95 South toward Richmond. Will be alone. Must look like an accident. Payment $200K upon completion. Half now, half after. Confirmation required." Asterisk. "And was there a reply?" "Yes. 2 hours later, just one word, asterisk, confirmed asterisk." The silence in the room was absolute. Patty turned to Edward. "Mr. Sterling, do you have anything to say?" Edward Sterling, the man who had dined with presidents and negotiated with tycoons, crumbled. He stood up, shaking, and looked around the room like a cornered animal. "He was going to destroy my family," he said with a broken voice. "Everything I had built. He was going to expose everything. I had no choice." His own lawyer tried to stop him, but Edward pushed him away. "You have no choice," he shouted. "None of you understand. Family is everything. And David Miller was going to destroy my family. So yes, I gave the order, and I would do it again if I could." The bailiff had to restrain him when he tried to lunge toward Melissa. "This is your fault, you little fool," he screamed at her. "You and your pathetic affair. This is all your fault." They dragged him out of the room, still screaming. Judge Castillo stared at the door Edward had exited through, then looked at the jury. "I believe we have heard enough for today. Closing arguments tomorrow." 2 days later, the jury returned with their verdict. The room was so full there were people standing in the aisles. I sat in my usual spot, gripping Betty's hand so hard I probably hurt her. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Castillo asked. "Yes, Your Honor," replied the jury forewoman. "In the case of the People versus Edward Sterling, on the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty." Tears began to run down my cheeks. "On the charge of wire fraud, guilty. On the charge of money laundering, guilty." One by one, the charges against Edward were read, and one by one, the jury found him guilty of all of them. Jason Sterling, guilty of fraud, guilty of complicity in murder. Andrew Silver, guilty of fraud, guilty of extortion. Judge Castillo stood up. "Edward Sterling, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jason Sterling, 20 years. Andrew Silver, 15 years. He banged the gavel. Justice is served. I walked out of the courthouse in a daze. Journalists surrounded me, shouting questions, but Mark Douglas kept them away. Bob put a hand on my shoulder. "Catherine, we won. David got justice. I know, I whispered. But he is still gone. I still lost him. But his memory is clean. And Edward Sterling is going to rot in prison for what he did. I looked up at the clear sea, sky. Thank you, David, I whispered. Rest in peace, my boy. Life began to find a new rhythm. Edward, Jason, and Drew were in prison. The media had moved on to the next story. The scandal gradually faded from the headlines. And I was still standing. The Times David Miller Foundation Times was officially established. $6 million allocated for scholarships for logistics students from low-income families. The first group of 10 scholars had been selected. Another $6 million I had put in a trust for Matthew, managed by Bob and an independent bank. When he turned 25, he would have full access. Melissa's lawyers and I had negotiated a custody agreement. I would have Matthew on weekends, Melissa during the school week. Melissa had served her suspended sentence and was on probation. She had sold the mansion and moved to a modest apartment in the suburbs of Charleston to be near Matthew. She worked as an accountant at a small business, earning a basic salary. Everything she had went to Matthew. It was a Sunday afternoon when I saw her again. I had taken Matthew to the park, the same park where David played as a child. Matthew was on the swings, laughing as I pushed him higher and higher. Higher, Grandma, higher. You're gonna fly away, sweetheart. That's what I want. I laughed, and for a moment, the pain eased. Hello, Catherine. I turned. Melissa was there, a few feet away. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, no makeup. She looked younger, more real, somehow. Melissa, what are you doing here? You were supposed to pick Matthew up at 7. I know. I wanted to talk to you, if you have a minute. I looked at Matthew, who was completely absorbed in the swings. All right. We sat on a nearby bench where I could see Matthew. How are you? Melissa asked awkwardly. Surviving. And you? The same. She paused. Catherine. I know you probably can never forgive me. For what I did to David, for how I treated you, for everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I regret it every day. I wake up and remember David is dead because of me, and it hurts so much I can barely breathe. I looked at her hands. They were shaking. It wasn't your fault they killed him, I said finally. That was your father. But I created the circumstances. If I hadn't had the affair, if I hadn't stolen, if I had been stronger, then your father would have manipulated you some other way, I said. Men like Edward Sterling are masters at controlling those around them. That is true. She hesitated. Do you forgive me? I thought about it. Did I forgive Melissa? No, I said honestly. Not yet. Maybe someday. But I understand that you were a victim too. A victim who made bad decisions, but a victim nonetheless. David knew that. In his video, he asked me to forgive you if I could. He said you weren't bad, just weak. Melissa covered her mouth, sobbing. He was too good for me. Yes, I agreed. He was. We sat together in silence, watching Matthew play. He's going to be a good man, Melissa said finally. Like his father, you will ensure it. We, I corrected. We times will ensure it, because as broken as our time, whatever we have is, Matthew needs us both. He needs to know his father through us. Melissa looked at me with teary eyes. Thank you for not taking him from me after everything I did. I don't do it for you. I do it for Matthew. And for David. He would have wanted his son to have his mother. Matthew ran toward us, breathless and smiling. Grandma, Mom, why are you both here? Melissa picked him up and hugged him. Just talking, baby. About your daddy. Daddy is in heaven, Matthew said with the certainty of a child. Right? Yes, I said, hugging them both. And he is very proud of you. A full year had passed since David's death. It was a spring morning. The kind of morning where Charleston wakes up with the scent of jasmine and the promise of soft warmth. I was in my side yard under the orange tree that David had planted in a large pot when he was a child. I had moved it from pot to ground years ago. Now it was full of white blossoms, filling the air with sweetness. Betty appeared with coffee and toast. Good morning, Mrs. Miller. Sleep well? Better than in a long time, I admitted. It was true. The nightmares had diminished. The pain was still there, it would always be there, but it wasn't as sharp anymore. It was more like a constant weight I had learned to carry. Matthew is coming today, right? Yes. We are going to plant a dogwood tree. In memory of his father. The doorbell rang. It was Matthew, now 10 years old, taller, with David's smile. Grandma. I hugged him tight. Hi, my love. Ready to plant our tree? Yes. I brought seeds I saved from the best tree at school. We spent the morning together digging in the earth, planting the sapling, watering it with care. Grandma, Matthew said while we worked, does Daddy see me from heaven? Always, sweetheart, always. Mom says Daddy was the best man she knew, that she was stupid for not valuing him more. I looked up, blinking against the sun. Your mom has learned a lot in the last year. We all have. Did you forgive Mom? The question of a child. Direct and impossible to evade. I'm working on it, Matthew. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's something you choose to do every day. But you let her come visit me here sometimes. That is forgiving. No, I smiled. You are very wise for 10 years old. We finished planting the tree, and Matthew sat on my lap, tired. Tell me another story about Dad, he asked. And I told him. I told him about the day David had won his first big contract, how he had come running home shouting with joy. I told him about how David always helped the neighbors, how he was kind to everyone. I told him about the good man his father had been. As I spoke, I looked at the orange tree David had planted decades ago. It was strong, its roots deep in the southern soil, its branches reaching for the sky, like a mother's love for her son. Deep, strong, eternal. David was gone, but his legacy lived on in Matthew, in the foundation that bore his name, in the students who would receive scholarships thanks to him, in the justice that had been served. And in me, because I was Catherine Miller. I had survived losing my husband. I had survived losing my son. I had fought against a powerful family and won. I had found strength I never knew I had. The doorbell rang again. It was Melissa arriving to pick up Matthew. But this time, I invited her in. To have iced tea on the porch, to sit with us under the orange tree. We weren't friends. Maybe we never would be, but we were something else. We were two women united by the love of a child and by the memory of a good man we had both loved in our own way. Thank you, Melissa whispered while Matthew played in the yard. For not giving up. For fighting. For getting justice for David when I was too cowardly to do it. I looked at her. She had lost weight. She had gray hairs, wrinkles around her eyes. The year had been hard for her too. I did it for David, I said, and for Matthew, and for myself. Still. Thank you. We sat together in silence, watching Matthew chase butterflies in the garden, and for the first time in a year, I felt something resembling peace. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. But it was hope. And for now, that was enough.